Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. You're tuned in to wildpodcast.me. That's WOWPODCAST.me. And today we have a special guest. We have Tricia Copeland. Tricia, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Deshaun?
I'm doing well. So today is a new day. You're coming out with some new books. Let's give the readers a little insight as to who you are. Let them get a little insight from you.
Okay, well, I am predominantly a YA fantasy author. I do have a new adult romance. It's a clean romance series, but my two biggest series, one which is complete called The Kingdom Journals, and the one that was ongoing that I have my new release for this month is called The Realm Chronicles, which is a young adult fae fantasy.
Okay. So what is that book about?
So the start of the series starts with a fae princess. The Fae in my world live in Middle Earth, which is a world just under our world. So it sort of mirrors Earth in its present time, human time. But the Fae live a very simple life. They don't have computer technology. They don't have phones. They don't have electricity. Very medieval times, I guess, or technology. So To Be a Fae Rogue is the fourth book in the series. The series starts out with a Fae princess named Titania, who's been handed the crown. She's the first ever female in her realm, and she's only 15, so she faces a lot of opposition. And as we move through the series, we find that there's one evil nemesis that is plaguing the Fae and the humans. So the Fae have to come together with their witch and vampire counterparts to try and get rid of this nemesis, I should say.
Right.
I won't say too much about her because she evolves throughout the series.
Okay. So I always like to ask this question. Why this particular topic? Why some of the topics that you've chosen to write about? Why those?
Well, the Fae Fantasy came out in kind of a I never thought I'd write fairies. I didn't know a lot about the fairies or fairy characters before I wrote them. And so my Fae ended up a little different from like the Lord of the Rings or some other Fae that you hear about. But I was invited to be in an anthology that centered around fantasy characters with I guess mental health challenges, basically. So I created this very character who had anxiety problems. She had lost four of her brothers in a really horrific battle. And so, for years she's been plagued with this anxiety, and now she's handed a crown. So that's how I started writing about her. I was thinking about this short story that I had to do for an anthology, and I saw a picture of a fairy, and I was like, oh, I could write about a fairy.
Right. So so in YA, I've noticed that a lot of the books kind of center around tackling some of the real life issues that young men and women go through. Was that some of your premise as well?
Definitely, she suffers from anxiety and panic attacks, and I think I've had anxiety and panic attacks before, so I think that's really common. It can be debilitating and embarrassing as a young adult, and then really interfere with your life if you don't learn to live and maybe overcome those things. So definitely a lot of the issues that she faces are some issues that young adults or new adults coming into their own can face. The sister series to the Realm Chronicles, which is the Kingdom Journals, deals with a lot of those too. We see a witch vampire hybrid who has to mainstream into human high school. So if you've ever been stuck between two or three worlds and two or three groups of people, there are definitely all those type issues. There's a issue of suicide in that book, and just a lot of things that we all may experience. And sometimes I think they're easier to deal with when you're in that fantasy unreal world situation.
Right. So speaking of that and issues that people have had throughout their lifetime, how was your childhood growing up?
It was good. It was good. I did suffer from anorexia as a young adult. So the first series I wrote was based on it was a fictionalized account. I created a character that wasn't me, but had similar challenges to me. And so I had that first Being Me series is based on my experience with developing anorexia and my recovery. So that was really important for me to write about because I think a lot of people deal with eating disorders as well.
Okay. So in writing that particular book, did you find it to be easy to write? Like, did you get through it in a good amount of time, or did you struggle with coming out with it?
It took me a long time. I was going slow and I really didn't even think at the time I was going to publish. I think I was doing it more for myself. So it was a little bit of entertainment. Like when my kids were young, I would write after they went to sleep at night instead of maybe reading or watching a show. And it was entertaining to create these characters and situations. And there's a lot of fun episodes or scenes in the books as well. It's partly a love story too. So I didn't ever think I would write it. So I think I started writing in 2008, or I didn't think I would publish, I guess. I started writing in 2008 and I didn't release the book until 2015. So
Yeah.
a 7-year project. Yeah.
So throughout your lifetime, as it stands today, what have you learned about yourself? What are your strengths and your weaknesses?
One thing I was surprised about is that I am a creative person. My background is in science, so I never really considered myself to be a creative person, but when I look back on my career and what I loved about doing research, it was more to how I love discovering or figuring out how to find the answer, not as much as getting the answer. And that's what I really do in my books too. I like knowing the ending and then trying to figure out how I can get my characters to that happily ever after.
Right. So you have a total of how many books that you're about to release?
This will be my 22nd.
22nd. Man, you've
I
been busy.
became, yes, I became a little obsessed with writing after I published my first series.
I'm man, that so are any of your books being pitched or maybe geared towards coming out as a small series, maybe even a movie?
I would love that. That would be super fun. A couple of my PR person has pitched a couple of them, and I don't even know where they pitched them to. So
Right, right.
we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Uh, is this me? So when I look at that particular cover, I'm wondering to myself, and just correct me if I'm wrong. When I see the cover, it looks like the young lady is trying to figure out, like, is this me? Like, is this the type of relationship I want to do? Is this the type of life that I want to live? Like, is this me that I want to go through? Is that what that book is about?
That's the book that, well, the first book in the Being Me series that chronicles a girl's experience with anorexia. And she's a freshman in college. She's out on her own for the first time. And she kind of gets into a lot of situations that aren't really what she's done before, experienced before, or how she's lived her life before. So, yeah, that title, definitely you're on mark with that.
Good, good. I'm working on my visuals here, trying to get it down pat. So, do you have a podcast?
I do have a podcast. My podcast is Finding the Magic Book Podcast.
Okay. And what do you typically talk about on your podcast?
Really the same thing we're talking about now. I interview authors about their books and their experience and their background in writing. It's really for readers. I want to introduce readers to new authors, and I've had this is my 4th season, so it's been a
Okay.
lot of fun. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you get started?
With my podcast in
Yeah.
21,
Okay.
so when everything kind of shut down, I realized I missed seeing all my author friends. And then I thought, well, if I talk to them on Zoom or whatever, and I record it, then I'll get to see my friends and we'll talk about our books.
Right. And how's that going for you? Doing pretty good?
It's good. Yeah, it's a lot of
Okay.
fun. I love learning about all the books. And half the time I pick up a new book and read it too. So
Right. So being in that podcast industry, what have you learned? I guess what are your takeaways from it?
my takeaways. That you can meet a lot of cool people. I think that's my take. I just really have fun with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, you're sort of like that you are.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I created this podcast to reach out to young women such as yourself and young men to find out, like, hey, what are you guys doing to write these books and how you're marketing them and kind of low key, don't tell nobody. I'll be trying to find out to see who's better than who.
Oh,
Like
okay.
which one of you guys are the greatest. Type of deal.
Well, when I typed in best book podcast, yours came up. So you must be high up there.
Oh, I'm doing something right. All right, all right. So, do you get an opportunity to do any type of workshops or anything like of that nature?
I haven't done any, no. I just kind of wing it. And I won't say that I'm the highest tech person.
Yeah, yeah.
I try not to have to edit my podcast or
Right,
anything like that. So,
right, right. Do you have you ever hosted any book workshops?
I haven't, no.
No.
Have
Would you
you?
be interested in doing one?
Right, yeah. You could
Yeah.
talk.
What would be maybe a lesson or two that you could teach somebody who is trying to get started?
I guess, and I think everybody's system is different,
Hmm.
but I guess I have taken a lot of classes on how to write, like on plot and like a hero story type classes because my background is science. It's not fiction writing at
Right,
all.
right,
So I've learned a lot about that as well as world, how I build my worlds, and it may not be how everybody else builds their worlds, but so I am going to be in a couple of workshops coming up. I wish I could remember the name of them now. Bookfest. I'm going to be at Bookfest world building, and I'm doing another one on monsters, creating monsters too. So
Okay. Oh, so you got your hands full with trying to expand your mind to be extremely creative when it comes to monsters.
definitely, yeah. I've tried to do some new monsters. You'll recognize one in to be a Fae queen that is the kobold that were. I don't know if you played Dungeons and Dragons, but I kind of took that character from the Dungeons and Dragons world, and then I've tried to bring back some old ones like goblins and trolls, and kind of put my own spin on how those characters look.
Right. So when all the dust has settled for the day and the kids are going to bed and everybody's out of your way, what do you do to relax? How do you bring yourself back to your own reality?
Well, I have maps. All around my computer and where I'm writing, I will have maps and character sheets and yeah, and I'm not a good drawer, but my cover person will tell you that I try to like sketch out things for the cover, and she's like, no, just don't do it.
Right, right.
I can usually print something out from the internet and draw on it to be what I want it to be. So
So I looked up something that you're into, and this is like my first time hearing about it, so I'm not even sure if I'm going to pronounce it correctly. YA dystopian.
mhm, that's right.
Can you give the readers a little bit of insight of what that is exactly? I know what it is, but the listeners may not.
Yeah, so the dystopian genre is usually when it's usually futuristic, although I guess it could be historical. It's usually futuristic, sometime in the future when there's been some major catastrophe and the world is no longer very good to live in, or their society is no longer very good to live in, whether it's like a catastrophic war or there's been like the world has been heated so far that it's uninhabitable or some horrible thing. So I have two books on a dystopian series that are kind of eerily predictive because I published the first one in 2019 about a worldwide epidemic, not plague, but pandemic,
Right.
basically. And so then in 2020, when the pandemic actually happened, it felt a little spooky to me. And nobody bought the book because nobody really wants to read anything about a pandemic when you're in a pandemic.
Right.
But that's, I love creating the story. I did it weirdly enough for a healing anthology, but because my background is in microbiology, I thought, well, these kids are going to heal her sister because her sister contracts the virus and they have to figure out a cure for her sister. So that's my take on the dystopian world.
For sure. Well, this interview for me has been highly anticipated because you booked it like a whole month in advance. That's why I was trying so desperately to make it happen. It was like, I still got a few minutes. Like, let's do this. So,
Well, thank
Tricia
you. I
Copeland,
appreciate that.
no problem. Thank you so much for swinging by Wild Podcast. I mean, guys, we're talking to Tricia Copeland. She's the author of the Kingdom Journals.